slice of life line art comic somewhere else, Baines.
You're not welcome anymore. Yeah, our standards are going up, man.
Squeezed out.
We only got
I know.
quality comics.
I did feel a little panic there when you started talking about it.
We're too high end, man. Hello and welcome to the Quackcast. This is Quackcast number 373, the Drunk Duck Quackcast. I'm Ozone Ocean, and with me is Tanserine. Hello, Tants.
Hello, hello.
Hello. We got Baines.
Hello.
And we have Pitt, who's just been riding the tiger because she knows he's mean. And he's got stripes and they shine and all sorts of stuff. But she's not here right at this moment. She's just doing something. But
chasing the dragon.
She's chasing the dragon. So yeah, she's down too long in the midnight sea at the moment. So that's it. We're going to be chatting about stupid millennials. You know, just they're dumb. We all know how bad millennials are. They're just the worst. Greedy baby boomers, who are just the most greedy, horrible people. And lazy Generation X's.
Okay, I like it. You had me for a second there. I thought you were just bashing millennials.
Everyone has been bashed at one time or another. So, yeah, that's
talking about our generations. Is that what you're getting at?
Oh, yeah, there we are. Talking about my generation, exactly. So yeah, because everybody likes to bash the up and coming generation for various reasons, but we're just going to talk about the various generations of webcomickers or comickers in general. That's what we'll chat about. So before we get into that, we've got to do the featured comic, and the featured comic for this week was Sky Commander. So I'm going to tell you about that right now.
Hello, I'm Elzan Elshin, and my feature for the week was Sky Commander. Straight from the pens of Darrell Hughes and Monique McNaughton comes Sky Commander. It's World War II. Racing through the skies over Berlin is a brave man all dressed in leather with streamlined shiny helmet on his head and a rocket pack strapped to his back, taking down jelly fighter planes with nothing more than a few shots from his trusty pistol to their engines. That's how you win a war. This is daring do, adventure, war, intrigue, and spies, inspired by the likes of Rocketeer, Indiana Jones, and other exciting adventures. Sky Commander is drawn delightfully in a retro fashion, solidly black and white, beautiful artwork, with clever use of half-tones and cross-hatching. I think the black and white really suits this more than color would, certainly for something set in World War II with such daring do. So, read Sky Commander by Koi Dog, rated T for terrific.
And that was our featured comic, Sky Commander. Alright, so after that we have the featured music that Gun Wallace has given us. And this week Gun Wallace has given us the music to a comic called dreamcomicbook.com. So obviously referencing some sort of website there in its name. Alright, so this music is a journey into a claustrophobically narrow electronic service tunnel filled with high voltage wires, humming with unimaginable power and mysterious cables running off endlessly into the dim, dark shadows in the distance. The creepy patterings and low hum of the music will take you there. So, take it away, Gun Wallace with dreamcomicbook.com. And that was the Quackcast music. Gumballs, thank you very much for that. Dreambook.com. Okay, so generations. There have been generations of comicers, haven't there? I mean, say, comics started in the 20th century, pretty much. You know, obviously it started way before that. But in the 20th century, we have comics as we know them. Obviously done on, in newspapers, that's where they started. And then they graduated to comic books. And finally, the ultimate evolution, online. That's what we've got now. But, so all of us, I think we represent maybe the second tier in webcomickers. We're like the second generation of webcomickers. Because the first generation really came in the late 90s, like Sluggy Freelance and 8-Bit Theater and a couple of those. And they were the real pioneers doing webcomics.
Yeah.
And then came along us, like on Drunk Duck, that kind of thing, and everybody else along with us. So we became the second generation, there were a lot of us coming through. The original lot, there was a very, very few of them. Then we came along, quite a few of us, but not really that many. And basically now the current generation are piggybacking off our hard work. And these newbies are coming in on Tapastic and Webtoons and all this. They don't know anything. They don't know they're born, basically. That's the latest generation of webcomickers hosting on Tumblr and Instagram, DeviantArt, all that coming in. So, yeah, there have been so many generations. And do you guys ever look down on the generation that's come now? Or, how do you feel about it? About the different generations of comickers?
I feel like we would probably be obscure without them.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Well,
We'd be obscure without them. What? Because everybody would
We'd
forget
just fade
us.
away. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, for one, look at a platform like Drunk Duck. It's a community website. Once people stop coming to that community, once it stops getting new people into that community, then it kind of starts to die as a community. It's like Rome. Once it stops expanding, it's going to die.
Yep.
We've seen it come close to that a few times. It needs new blood. And same thing with the comic industry in general. If you don't have new blood, then it stops being a topic. Then it stops being something of any relevance. Ergo, people, the titles that were there before will slowly start to fall into obscurity without a new generation.
That's true. We need to be replaced. And
well,
I don't like to use that. You sound very much like a crotchety old man. I would say I don't think that anyone is replacing anyone else. It's like a progression, a progression and an evolution of webcomics. Because if you notice, the way that the new people are creating their webcomics very much has a very different feel and approach. That is also affected by the advent of new technologies and new habits like reading stuff on your phone, which when we came about, at least when I came about, wasn't a thing. So, and everyone would have normal computer screens to read the comics in. and now they don't. Now they have smartphones and what's the name, the iPads and stuff. So the way that the format of the webcomic evolves and changes, and they are like the continuation of what we are doing rather than a replacement. They have a completely different feel, especially if you log in at some of the very latest ones that you would find, even like on Tapastic and stuff. And even here on the Duck, there are some comics that are now using that format. Like they have this very huge single, like the tier is like a single panel.
It's vertical scrolling.
Yes, it's vertical scrolling. They are very big. The balloons are huge. The font size in it is glaringly big because it's supposed to be read on tiny screens and stuff like that. And that also changes the art and how the art is created, because they take a completely different creative approach to create the effects that would be done differently if you had, your classic layouts and so on. So it's not a replacement, I think. It's just the evolving of the species.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You still have a place, Oz. You still have gorillas. They're useful. Even though evolution.
We even have pelicans, and you're fine.
People still buy trilobites or whatever they're called.
Trilobites. Yeah. There is a continuous evolution over the years. I mean, we still have bloody Marvel and DC.
Look at what they've had to do to keep their titles relevant. They've had to switch media to not switch media outright, but the fact that they've gone to filmmaking has garnered a whole new audience that might not even ever pick up a comic book, but they still are aware of the title.
Yeah.
And sometimes the title or the subject might remain relevant when the media or the face that it uses doesn't stay the same. Like, it's not all one big homogenous sheet of...
Yeah, that's true. The movies are bringing people back to the comics to an extent because they want to know more about where those characters came from and more about the worlds those characters live in. So, yeah, that is true. So, yeah, you guys are right. We do have the old comic book world coexisting at the same time with the more modern style of webcomics. And Marvel and DC and the other one, Dark Horse, well, all those ones, I think they were really left out in the cold when webcomics came along. Even when Drunk Duck first started, they didn't exist with an online presence. But then they came on, quite recently, actually. Maybe, it was a few years ago now, but recently in terms of, Drunk Duck's been around longer than those people have been online. And then suddenly they transitioned online, and now you can get Marvel Comics and DC and all that kind of stuff on your phone when they didn't exist before. So yeah, they got on the new bandwagon, and they've dragged themselves into the future with the rest of us.
Yeah, evolving with the times. It is a kind of interesting side note that the stories that are being done in the movies, though, which are huge mainstream hits, certainly Marvel is the hugest mainstream thing going on right now in movies, are like old stories. They're like 60s and definitely 70s and 80s stories, maybe early 90s, like Infinity War, I think, is like a 1990 comic, so that's kind of odd, But that's the stuff that's really, it's the, I was going to say the best stuff. I guess that remains to be seen, but it's the kind of the stuff that really has proven to have legs story-wise and stayed with people who read comics back in the day and now are really having a huge impact on the sort of bigger mainstream audience.
Yeah, so what Pitt was trying to say was that even the big companies have kept relevant by changing media from comics to movies, and they've brought about a whole new audience these particular audience may never pick up the titles, but they're still aware of those older characters and older franchises. They're still aware of those character franchises like Superman and Captain America, X-Men, and all that, even though that maybe they'll never look at comics. But yeah, they're still keeping up with those things. And so, yeah, as Pitt was saying, they changed, they jumped into...
They changed form. Like, it's still the franchise name, but it had to change. This new generation of the franchise had to change body, so to speak. It had to change its media.
Yeah.
Because the movies are what's prevalent and when you talk about Superman and Spider-Man and Batman and all that kind of stuff, So that train is passed already.
Good point. Deadpool as well, all those kind of things that people really didn't know about. A lot of people do know about it, obviously, and Deadpool has obviously got a huge, big fan base, but it's been expanded so much more. I didn't know about Tank Girl at all as a comic until the movie came out, and, then I did. So...
Same thing with Spawn. I was a huge Spawn fan in, like, the mid to late 90s. And the reason why I got into Spawn was because the movie came out. And funny, like, I wanted to see the movie so bad, and I didn't get to for a long time. I started reading the comics first. So the movie is what prompted my love of the title back then. But I got into the comics, is what I actually got into. And then I saw the movie, and then being still young, and it's like, oh, it's so cool. Look at his cape and stuff. Oh, demons, cool. But,
oh, jeez. Such terrible effects in that movie. But the cape and the clown by Leguizamo was amazing. Oh,
he did a great job. He was awesome. Oh, he was so fun to watch.
Yeah. Best thing in the movie by far is like he's like a superstar in that movie. Everything else is just orbiting around his sun. His supernova.
When's the clown gonna come back on screen? When's the clown gonna come back?
Exactly.
The violator.
Oh, jeez, that thing was amazing.
Think about that. That basically Marvel and everything. I think that they definitely gave a boost to people to be at least aware that comics are a thing, and they also perhaps made it more mainstream for people to get into comics without feeling like they are either, reading kids stuff or they are doing something that is not mainstream, that is, reserved for people with specific identities or whatever. But I do think that they basically jumped ship from webcomics. They repackaged their comics into the movie format, and you could even argue that in terms of pop culture, we have been going progressively, quote unquote, backwards, because as you mentioned, all the stories that are dominant now are the stories from the 50s or the 40s or the 70s maybe, but mostly 60s. And they are all very much stories that were created with the social circumstances of those times. Yeah. And they are very much relevant today, which, that's another discussion. But I do think that Marvel and everybody in those big moguls of mainstream comics are basically just they have transitioned into big film let's say legacies. I don't know how to describe it, but they don't really focus, I think, as much in creating new comics per se. Like maybe they do in some, like they create these experimental new yarns, like the one where Captain America was actually a sleeper. I don't remember how. Yeah. And things like that, but they fall short very much, considering, like, in comparison with the repackaging that they're doing.
Yeah.
That's
a good point. The world of webcomics is a bit more dynamic than the older style of comics. Although, that like I was saying before, that is the really old generation of comics, even though there's younger people drawing them now, obviously. There are still the much older generation are drawing them as well. You still have Rob Liefeld and all those kind of people doing comics still. So the modern generation, us included, are doing this explosion of webcomics, which is mainly just individual people who aren't being paid or anything like that. This is for the vast majority of us, it's a hobby thing. And it's far more creative and diverse. Before the web and webcomics came, there were people doing zines, which were their own little things that they would photocopy and they would distribute. Maybe they'd get some money for that. And, maybe like these small little runs they'd do, they'd get them done at printers or whatever. And that is really the forerunner of webcomics, I think. Because webcomics are they're not really fan created things, because we're not all fans of things. We don't create comics because we're fans of stuff.
They're kind of like they tend to all be really independent works, I would
independent, say. Yeah.
And going back to just real quick, going back to what we were saying about comics and I kept on in comic shops. I kept on almost saying web shops. I'm like, no, I'm not thinking of like actual physical comic shops. When I go into comic shops these days, I find that there is quite a lot of new blood. Actually, it's just it usually. When I walk into comic shops, it usually tends to be, of course, divided up, like this is the Marvel, this is the DC, and they have their staple titles and stuff. But then at least half of the shop will be titles that I've never heard of before that are released in thick, like paperback graphic novels. And I think the graphic novel is the new kind of thing that the paper comics take up. And there's quite a lot of comics that you can see now that are unique titles that get sold and distributed nationwide and internationally and whatnot. So I think that there are some new ideas, and I think that I think this new generation is coming, and in the form of these graphic novels. That's the big thing. Okay. It's cool to have a graphic novel. It's not as cool to have a comic book.
Well, I know
because I'm. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the objectives of a lot of webcomickers, even the people who did zines, was to be able to break into the mainstream and to become a legitimate comic artist, or at least have their work published by a big publisher. And that was always a thing. People weren't totally invested. They didn't totally have their feet in the webcomic world or the zine world. They wanted to do that. And even now, people still want to break into that world, and they do manage to do it. So maybe they're behind some of those titles you've seen, Pitt. Webcomics.
I think.
Go on.
Pitt has definitely a very good point, but I was thinking. I wasn't thinking of the graphic novel, which definitely I think is in some sort of renaissance, because there are a lot of graphic novels and there's a lot of very serious work being done, not only in terms of art, but also in terms of, commentary, social commentary, or historical, or even, original fantasy stuff, you name it. So what I wanted to say was that the webcomic world also, I think, invests a lot on the graphic novel, because at least in my awareness, there are comic strips for sure that are in webcomic form, but most of them are long format, long story comics that are, updating weekly or whatever. It's not like a comic strip.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Sluggy Freelance and 8-Bit Theater, if I'm not mistaken, started off like basically a comic strip. Small gag.
Yeah.
3 to 4 panel little things, daily things, and so on and so forth. But now, most people that I have seen creating comics, like web comics or graphic novels, print comics, are investing in the graphic novel. So the graphic novel, I think, is a different animal from comics, like sequential stories that have a bunch of characters that go through different adventures, like in the classic Marvel or DC format. Yeah. That was long.
You're saying that they're different formats. So in the way that they're told is what you were saying? Are you saying that they were different formats in the way that they're told?
No, I think the approach in general, like you have, it's like it's the difference between a movie and a series, in a sense. An episodic series, like the old classic format, had these characters that also wouldn't usually at least, wouldn't age, and they would by the end of the particular segment of the episode that they were going through, they would sort of revert to their original situation and be ready to get into another adventure next month or next week. Whereas the graphic novel is an independent story with characters that are usually created for that particular story, and they don't go afterwards into other adventures. It's like a book. You have these characters that go through.
The comics tend to be more episodic, whereas the graphic novel tends to be more cinematic. I get you. Yeah. I think generally, that tends to hold true.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, you're right. In the webcomic world, the graphic novel is king, because we have more time to work on pages and to work stories out, so we could really just take advantage of that and expand into it and work on these things for years. Whereas gag-a-day strips are way too much work. A lot of people do that, but it's just... And, people make money off that. But it's really, really, really hard work. And most webcomickers would prefer to be more creative than spend their time coming up with jokes and drawing 7 strips or 5 strips a week.
Yeah. And I think that tends to be what's popular among people as well. I think like either you have like the gag-a-day strip, there have been some popular ones. There's that one, I can't remember. There's that one history-based one. Everybody else probably knows what it is. It got really popular, and there's a few like that. But on the other end of the spectrum, when it comes to comic stories, like watching somebody's, doing something on a day-to-day basis, we tend to want to see more progression now. If it's not a gag a day, we want to see progression, and we want to see an arc instead of he saves the girl at the end of this issue or 3 issues, and then things go back to the way that they were. The status quo comes back. No, we want to see how that changes the hero or the world or the setting or whoever it's about. We want to see something come from that.
Very true. It's nothing more disappointing than being invested in a story arc and having nothing change because of it. That's so disappointing at the end of it, which would happen with older style stories. Think, oh my god, what about this new thing he found and that experience and all these things and these new people? Oh,
let's never talk about that again.
Yes. Let's never mention it again.
Return back to the and another reason, it just occurred to me, with these episodic comics that would come out, the difference once again in the format, and if they would have to be released every month, every couple of weeks, makes it so that they have to remain accessible for somebody to get in on the comic title at any given point, especially when they get such big backlogs of comics. Whereas these other formats now that we're talking about, these graphic novels that tend to be like if they're really long running, maybe they've got 9-10 books, but you can still make it a rich, in-depth arc progression because you don't have 100+ books to wade through to try and find an inroad.
Yeah, you don't have to buy issue number 580 or whatever. You don't have to wade through damn issues. It's all in one book. Or in the webcomic world, it's all there online. So people can easily go back through the archives and find a spot and read through. You're not left out in the cold like you would be, as you said, in an episodic comics where it was just, a totally different kind of... Well, that sort of plays into what Chance was talking about before, changing formats. So it's changing styles, changing formats depending on how people are consuming it. So it's interesting in that way. And what you said about turning into movies, which is another evolution of the particular branch of the comic world. I like this.
There's some hope after all, because not only is that more fulfilling for readers to read, but it's more fulfilling for us to make and rich stuff like that. Even when it's silly, Putrid Meat was silly as shit, but it still had a progression eventually. And even that when it was more episodic, it still had a progression to its episodes, Once Bones got sick, and infected that whole place, it didn't just go back to normal. Half of Septica ends up getting fucked up in the next issue because of it. Didn't have to fuck it, I'll put myself on a little bit of a higher horse. I'm proud of how I structured Putrid Meat. I'm so glad. I should get more kudos for it.
Should get awards for it, exactly.
I do get awards. No, people are very, very,
they acknowledge it.
Yeah, they pat my back a lot, so that's fine. It's not like I'm getting money or anything. What was I saying before I went on my self-righteous rant? This is what I do.
About the progression, and
it's structure and change.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember what my point is. God damn it, no! I was mounting that hill. I was getting ready to plant that fucking flag, man. Why do I do this? Oh, good.
So what do you guys think about, I mean, we did sort of chat about the younger generation now, but I think one of the privileges of an older generation is always to look back and in your hindsight, your experience or whatever, and think, oh, they'll never have to struggle the way we did, or they'll never have to do this, or they'll never have to do that. That's just one of the privileges of experience, you know.
I think they really have to struggle to create their work just as much as we did, and maybe even more in the sense that there are so many titles out there now that you will get yourself noticed more, like put more work into getting noticed than perhaps we would have.
But go on.
Yeah, the one thing though that they won't have to think about as much is the status of creating a webcomic, that it is for everyone. It can be for adults only. It can be for mature audiences. It can have a content that is extremely serious and not for kids. And it is basically a legitimate form of art now, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
This has been established.
Yeah.
Especially, after things like Mouse came out and Persepolis and all sorts of very, very heavy in content graphic novels. I would say that now they don't have to convince that they are not catering to kids.
Yeah,
that's something they don't have to do.
They paved the way for us and for them in order to they created a format. I think for our particular generation, which we really came through with the free hosting, which was before us. People had to like set up their own websites and do all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Our generation bought through the free host and the what's that thing that you've chance to WordPress that came a bit later. Yeah. WordPress came a bit later, and our generation sort of brought that into their format. So we did more than anything, I think, to prime the world for webcomics, because things like Sluggy Freelance, they were around, but then like later on they had Penny Arcade and those sort of comics. They had dedicated readership, but with us, I think we sort of flooded the market, so to speak, and created, we sort of, I don't know, maybe signaled to the world that this was a thing you could do. Like, anybody can do this, and, come along and join us too. And we created, like, the mass readership of all the different kinds of comics, because before us it was mainly the gag-a-day kind of strips or the gamer kind of strips, those kind of things like Slice of Life, all that. It was very limited, and mainly based on games. Most online webcomics were game focused, and when we came along, suddenly I think we bought through the wider version of what could be possible with our particular generation. So I think that's what we bought more than anything else. Everything.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. No, but I mean, more accessibility like that, absolutely. I mean, I remember when I was, when I first would start drawing comics, and I mean, like, sit there in my room and sketching without any thought of I would love to put this up so somebody could read it. No, that was the furthest thing from my mind. I didn't need any of that on top of how much I was already being made fun of at school, but even back then, like the late 90s, if I wanted to put my comic up somewhere, my choices would have been really limited. Either I become a professional and work on somebody else's work, most likely, or me as a preteen, looks into how to put it up on the internet. which was unspeakable for me back then. I barely had internet privileges, I couldn't do that shit. But nowadays, I mean, how many people on Drunk Duck are, young teenagers who are able to post their work on a free platform as much as they please,
Yeah.
So we are part of a generation who has made it more accessible, and then, it'll be neat to see what comes after us. I think comics as a format, and I mean purely as a mainly visual, can't speak. I was out in the sun today. Mainly as a visual format with words to some extent, a more minor use of words. That kind of format will always be around in one form or another. I mean, and it has been for some time. If you think about things like the Book of Kells, or those old religious books and stuff like that are mainly, illustrations with a bit of text. Yeah. That kind of thing is always going to work in one way or another. What dictates whether comics or not will be around is whether the format of a specific comic will continue. But I think there will always be that use of illustration with a more minor use of word.
Yes.
Which we tend to now. I think it will always be around to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no reason why it shouldn't be.
Yeah. We have had experimental things in the world of webcomics. There are a lot of things. Baines, you were doing cartoons, animation.
Yeah, that's how I started. Initially, that was my idea, to do like a little animated series, and to kind of, I mean, even like when I was thinking of it initially, it was a little bit of a throwback in style. It's like, I'll make it kind of reset in a way at the end of every episode. I only did a few episodes, so I didn't even get to that point. I was still sort of developing the sort of setting and characters over the first couple episodes.
But that was the kind of thing that fit in with that format, wasn't it? I mean, an episodic thing fit in with an animated series, didn't it? So
yes,
that worked.
Yeah.
And then you transitioned to doing webcomics, but a lot of other people had animation aspects in their webcomic. Even I did animation as part of my webcomic at the end to my first series. But a lot of people were doing all sorts of weird things back in the early 2000s, I think it was. But now it's flattened out into what Tance was saying, into like the modern version at the moment is like just vertical scrolling. We don't have all the weird experimental animation and sound on comics and Flash comics as well.
Oh, and remember how is the term for that? The eternal scroll, something that like
Infinite
there were
canvas.
Yes. Thank you. That's the one. Where you start and it never finishes. Like there are the panels just flow into one another and everything.
Yeah. The Scott McCloud stuff, I tried that. I've got one big page of my comic that was an infinite canvas, but unfortunately because of the way they programmed Drunk Duck back in the 2010 or whatever, we can't do wide pages anymore, so that does not work. I hate those bastards for that.
I've had pages where people have said it seemed to take forever to get through it. It's a different thing.
Yeah, it's your infinite text.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
you're like, is this thing ever going to end? That's what I get.
That's basically every Quackcast, isn't it?
as you're like, you don't realize it, you don't see behind the scenes, but as you're scrolling, like once the page loads for the next one to load up the next page, where as you're scrolling, like the artist is actually sitting there like drawing it really quick, like, all right, oh shit,
we need another one. Oh my god. That's what I did find. The little bit of the Infinite Canvas stuff that I've looked at, I really found that it made me uncomfortable as a reader for that reason. Like you didn't know what you were like. What am I committing to here? Like how much am I committing to get to? Yeah. Who knows what? You know.
Really, I found it.
Yeah, I really found that strongly. Like it was just something in me like resisted. Like I don't want to be like stuck in a long thing that I don't know like where this is going.
Man.
One thing that made me stress out a little bit reading through one of those is that, okay, if I want to take a break, how do I mark my spot?
Yeah,
I have to go through the entire thing again so that I can, catch up to where I was and continue, or something like that.
Right.
So there were things like that. Maybe that's why I didn't catch on as much. I mean, I don't see them being made as much anymore.
Yeah, well...
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
One of the biggest problems is it goes exactly back to what I was saying about how Drunk Duck in 2010 changed itself so you couldn't do wide pages. Basically, all of the web has become more curated and more standardized. Back in the early 2000s, but that was the Wild West. You could do anything back then. The possibilities were endless. Infinite Canvas is like the poster child for that.
There were some ugly web pages out there, man.
There was some bad things, but there was creativity. These days, now, Drunk Duck is an excellent example of this. Even though I love the site, it became into a format where you couldn't expand out. You couldn't put animated stuff on the site anymore. You couldn't do gigantic pages. You were stuck. You could do vertical ones, but you can't do horizontal. You can't do a lot of things. You can't do animated GIFs and things like that.
Yeah, you just reminded me. I had a bit of heartbreak at the beginning of the week. There's this website that I used to love to go to. If it wasn't made in the early 2000s, certainly made to look like it was called Chez St. John. And it was just a bizarre website. And it's kind of an art piece because it was made by this guy who made this character, who the backstory of this character was that she was a model and she got like hit by a car or burnt or something like that. And so she was made out of a lot of mannequin parts now. So of course it looked really bizarre, and she would have these kind of triggers that would go off, and the things on the website were supposed to be, her expression of these triggers. And I know that there's some YouTube videos you can look at who have kind of, thankfully, before it went down, which was last week, I realized it went down last week. But before it went down, they were able to kind of document the different things to click through in these websites. And it had like it was just like a bunch of like GIFs and images and sound effects and like just zing zangs all over the web page. It was just like a mess, but it was also just so fun to go through, because it was kind of creepy too. It was like very unsettling, but at the same time, it was like walking through a fun house. And
cool.
So it breaks my heart that it's no longer up. I remember reading that the guy who made the project did actually end up dying. So I think it's been some time since that happened, and so maybe just the lease on the website is up or what, I don't know, but I really recommend going out and checking out the YouTube videos that have documented it. It's called Chez St. John, SHAYESAINTJOHN.
Oh, please write it in the notes. I'm terrible at transcribing stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think I spelled that right either.
Just right in the message section.
Chez St. John, you said? Is it?
Yeah, here, I'll write it. A little digression, but yeah, we were talking about the old website formats, and how you were saying that they could be more experimental and clever like that. It's just, this was a great example of one that was.
All right, I'll list that in the Quackcast notes. Yeah. So the thing is, nowadays, everything's curated. Drunk Duck is a good example. We were one of the first ones that did that, ironically. But after that, of course, we have, Facebook and Google and Instagram and Tumblr and all these websites, and the new ones, Tapas and Webtoons and all that. They're great in that they're bringing more people to the web, but they're doing it in like a very pre-packaged McDonald's Happy Meal kind of way. Everything has to be... even Apple as well. Apple's another good example. Everything they do is very curated and very much... You could do anything you like as long as it fits into our little pod and our little tiny format. So, yeah, that's one of the problems of now. There's so much more stuff, but it's not there's not much variation, not much creativity in form. There was a good comic, A Supermassive Black Hole on Drunk Duck, still going strong. That guy, in the early days, that was very much infinite canvas kind of stuff, and he did animation and he did video and everything. I think he's mainly doing just more static art now, but that was his thing. So, yeah, I'll put that in the notes as well. You guys have read that one as well?
I don't think so.
Actually, it never came to my attention.
Yeah, it's worth. He's still updating all the time. I'm glad he's kept on the site. I should actually do an interview with him one time. But yeah, I think even back in the beginning, he did some of the animated stuff he would put on Drunk Duck, but mainly his animated stuff would be on some other site, like maybe even YouTube. And he would do like the normal, 2D, just simple static versions would be the versions he would have on Drunk Duck. And especially nowadays, because we can't do anything else here. But yeah, that was pretty interesting. Can you guys think of any other ones that you sort of liked back in the day that did something more creative and weird?
Don't do this.
Well, I can think of there was this one about this Russian guy and his girlfriend did this comic together. It was about virtual reality and aliens and all sorts of things. I can't remember its name, but I featured it on Drunk Duck and it had some of the things there, and that was so cool. Sorry, I can't tell you what it was. Alpha Shade, which was a good one on Drunk Duck in the early days. They haven't been on Drunk Duck for ages, but they were one of the most popular, along with Charlie the Vampire. That was all done in Flash. So what you could do with that is you could look at a page and think, oh yeah, this is pretty cool. And then you could zoom in and you could keep on zooming in because it was vector art. So that was so clever.
See, that actually seems really cool. Like it's kind of, I mean, I could definitely see I could see that making a return and maybe even, there being more crossover at some point. With, you have the video game sort of thing. How they have these larger and larger worlds that you can kind of explore.
Oh yeah. Speaking of that, we've got Amelia P, who is an independent webcomicer who made the jump to do pro comics in the pro world, and now she's turning her independent webcomic King's Club into a video game. So
nice.
Yeah, there we are.
Awesome.
Perfect example of someone being super creative.
Mm-hmm.
And she's not from the new generation. She's from our generation of comicers, I think, pretty much.
Yep.
Yeah. Started out on Drunk Duck doing, whatever, and then became a superhero.
Yeah.
I think we had didn't we have her as a guest? In one of the past.
Sort of. I wrote out an interview for her, and then we all read it out. we were Amelia P for the Quackcast, or Amelia Wu, one of the names.
We should have her for an interview.
Yeah, she's a bit self-conscious because she can't speak English that well. She feels, so she doesn't feel that she can speak English. She's a bit self-conscious because she's Brazilian and she doesn't want to embarrass. I don't know. I find that understandable.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, definitely. Would she be more inclined if perhaps you guys had like an email correspondence or something, and then perhaps read out her answers?
We already did that.
That would still...
We already did that with her.
Oh.
Yeah, I think you even read some out too.
I probably did. We've done so many of these things. I can't even remember what I did yesterday.
You were driving a tank. Well, it wasn't yesterday. But
yeah.
Still.
Yeah, Pitt, you drove the last Tiger tank in the world that runs, so I think you've got a bit of a free pass.
I wish I...
Well, you sat next to the guy who drove it.
I vicariously drove it.
But Baines was saying last week that you had a little pretend steering wheel.
I would never mock Pitt like
that. Somebody just give her any steering wheel and she'll be okay.
She'll believe it.
She'll be all right. She'll think she's driving. She'll be sure that she is.
Like Maggie Simpson in the start of The Simpsons.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
B.
She's like spinning things and turning things, and they make like clicking noises, and that's enough to amuse, keep her distracted.
Oh,
right.
So yeah, we should have had a representative of the latest generation of webcomickers. We should have. I did not think
an ambassador.
Yeah, and an ambassador of the older generations. So
so you could sit there and say, "Listen, Sonny." Although,
let me tell you something.
For sake of fairness for Oz, he is not a generation hating asshole. And I know for a fact that he's not. I think at the beginning of the Quackcast, he was just being devil's advocate. So,
thank you.
I don't think I ever used that word right, but you know what I mean. I always want to say it at times where it's inopportune, but I think it fits. So, so nobody be mad at him. He's not a generation and child murdering, Chronos
child murdering. Yeah, he was just doing a thing. He was just doing.
It was a phase.
The old switcheroo. That's just something I like saying. It doesn't apply at all.
The old bait the switch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of
Vader.
I think webcomics are now very careful. Like speaking of the development and webcomics being a product of their time, that I mentioned. I think I mentioned at least in this Quackcast at some point. I would say that another thing that you would easily see is that they tend to be much more sensitive to all kinds of audiences, in the sense like
good point.
I have noticed that they are far more sensitive of how any reader, even the audience that they are not targeted at, would take the content of the particular webcomic.
Yeah.
So, which wasn't a thing, at least I don't remember it being a thing, like, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So,
that is a fantastic point, actually. Yeah, so it's not only the format that has changed, but the style of writing, the style of storytelling has changed as well, because we have as a society become more aware that there are more people in our society than just the majority, which, for us English-speaking people from English-speaking countries is white people, and because a lot of media was always traditionally aimed at young men, that's how a lot of webcomickers and things like that started doing it, because they thought, we'll just keep on doing the same stuff aimed at young men. So women are sort of, there to be looked at and admired, blah, blah, blah. And the young men get everything, going and blah. And so now we've become, this world is made up of so many more people. Not just young white men. There's everybody here.
It could be anybody reading this.
And anybody writing it too. It's not just young white men writing it. It's everybody's writing it now. So, Chance is right. And things have become more accessible and more inclusive, which is a good thing. We did our PC Gone Mad a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, but it doesn't always go mad. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying the PC Gone Mad, we were just sort of, having fun with that idea. The thing is, it's not really PC. It's just waking up to reality and the actual reality of the world we live in. It is.
Yeah, and actually, sorry. I'm sorry. Go on.
No, that's it. That's my point.
So actually, going on, I wanted to talk about trends in the sense that there are things that are quote unquote fashionable to be making a webcomic on rather than others. Like, for example, it is more current, more a la mode, let's say, to have this romance story between, for example, same-sex couples and or couples that are in some way non-traditional in webcomics. I have seen this particular theme permeate a lot of new titles that come out. Like they will include either something that refers or is a callback to a minority issue, or it might be more inclusive in the sense that the romance is not only the classic, or it isn't at all the classic romance. And that is a trend. I have seen it be a trend. Like, people feel that if it doesn't have these particular elements in it, it's not cutting edge and it's not, as popular. And I'm saying that because I have been watching the features that take place not in the dark. The dark is extremely more diverse and doesn't follow trends like this, at least to my awareness. But for example, if you go at Tapastic and you see the thematology of their features, it is very, very almost militarily a very specific type with a very specific thematology and a very specific approach to things, which I think is because that is the fashion. When the fashion changes, the features are going to change as well, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. People will go along with a fad, and I've noticed that. I don't really follow those newer comic sites, but from what I've seen, I didn't like them very much because they do tend to knock things into their little, 2x2x2 format. I'm not talking literally, I'm talking metaphorically. They hammer things into a very similar Lego block kind of look, and they want things that fit into that theme, and that's how they're going to promote themselves. So things, or cel-shaded, because that's the popular thing, and that's what they're going to promote. Even though they have all sorts of different things, but the face they show to the world is this particular style. With the same-sex relationship, blah, 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 body positive.
Not necessarily, but it is very much, high up there. Or, the romance, troubled romance, whatever that is.
Which, I mean, it's fine to do that. It's fine, but it's boring when that's the main thing you show and you don't show a bigger diversity.
It might be boring to us,
but I would say that it would be. It's not how much diversity you show. It's how much substance you give the themes that you choose. Like, for instance, I think we all could be in agreement that, part of it is, that there's trend and stuff, but the other part of the bigger diversification away from just the common, let's say, tropes, whatever, that we've come to know, or the traditional things that we used to write about, is because, once again, this is a format, webcomics are a format that's open to anybody in the world who has access to the internet. Mm-hmm. So therefore, people will be writing about more of a diversity of subjects and things that resonate for them. But, the difference is how much substance will you put behind that theme that separates it from a trend to something that is near and dear to you, or that you do feel that you should be writing about, but that is why you've chosen it. I'm not speaking well, but I think people get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I have discovered actually stories that are extremely compelling, and they meet, the quote-unquote requirements of the trend. Huh. And they are very compelling because you can tell that the person making them, okay, maybe, at the right place at the right time, but I don't think they could make things differently for that particular work, at least, even if it wasn't the trend. Like, it's something that that they have worked in their minds and they are creating it because it's not just, what the people want, quote unquote, but it is something that really is powerful for them. Yeah. So that comes across. But, oh my God, there are also like tons and tons and tons of things that are made simply to get the clicks. And you can tell that. And I don't know I don't remember that being too much a thing when we were, like, when I was very, very much extremely wet behind the ears. And I was looking up to all the, popular stuff that existed. That didn't seem to be a thing. Like, okay, we are all gonna do this. And or we are all gonna do that.
You're right there. You are right. Like, I'm a member of comic groups on Facebook, and there are a type of webcomicer who will, design a comic in order to get an audience. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But that's what they'll do, and they will pick up on a common theme that is popular. And so that does exist. There are webcomicers like us who just do whatever the hell we want. We want to do a particular story because that's what we want to do. There are others that want the audience and they want the clicks and they want to be famous, and so it is more designed. So yeah, that does totally exist. People follow trends and they create for it. So yeah, it exists, which did not exist in the previous generations. I think you're right, that because there wasn't that expectation of being able to be popular, because that was such a rare thing. To be a super popular webcomic was considered more luck, or just a factor of hard work in getting an audience, or putting the work out there and hopefully they'll come. But now people know it's a possibility and work towards it deliberately. So that is a big change between our generation and the current one.
I could even say that it starts to feel a little bit like mainstream. Like, the webcomic was amazing and it was really cool because you didn't have to jump through the hoops of mainstream publishing requirements. Like a publisher wanted you to do this, this, and that was it. And there was no way you would be able to get published if you were doing something different, no matter how good you were.
Yeah.
But web comics and e-publishing made that a thing, made that possible. Now it has this feeling. It's not by any means the feeling that you're getting, mainstream print, huge publishing house comics and stuff like that. But there is a feeling that people break into web comics and they feel that they have to meet standards, specific standards that are pre-cut and that have nothing to do with what they want to do. And they have to do that in order to be noticed. I get the feeling from younger creators that, oh my God, I have to make this so that I will be noticed, because if I don't do this, it's not going to be popular and I'm going to fall into obscurity or whatever. So I do get the feeling that it is getting somehow streamlined into a very rigid set of requirements that the community is in a way almost setting for themselves without needing to, like making a very flexible field extremely rigid for no reason. That is my...
Yeah. I agree. That is happening. And I just want to reiterate, this is a stream. Obviously, that is not the whole generation that is now. They're all doing that. No, there are people that are doing it, and that is a notable trend, but it's not everybody. There's still, as people being very creative and, doing animated stuff, there even that exists on the fringes. I'd say there's a lot less of that than there used to be. But there's still people doing their own stories and their own thing, their own way. There's still that coming up, I'm sure. But yeah, to answer you're right, that is a noticeable trend that we do have that. I think probably that did exist beforehand, but in a very, very small amount of people. They were, like, say, the gamer comics. Like, I mentioned Penny Arcade. So Penny Arcade wasn't doing that. Penny Arcade made it big, being a gamer webcomic. And there were a whole lot of webcomics that copied it. And that became a stream. And so that was probably one of the early stages of what you were talking about now.
Mm-hmm.
All the gamer webcomics doing all this, like, they would have like a couple of roommates or whatever, and they'd spend their time playing games and they make jokes about it. And there's a comic on Drunk Duck, what's it called? Power Up Comics, that's makes fun of that trend. I don't know. It's
really?
Popular. Yeah. Power Up webcomics. I don't know. It's like the Adult Swim of Drunk Duck.
Okay.
Should check that out then.
It's in that it's weird and you probably won't like it.
You don't know that. I like weird things.
Yeah, you might. I don't know. I didn't like it. I'm not a fan of it. But yeah. So yeah, we're not going to be crotchety and say, "Yep, those young kiddies, they don't know they're born. They're always doing the same thing." And the trends have always existed to an extent, but we can pick out trends that are happening that are different, obviously, because there's different circumstances than there were back in the old days. I mean, for us, we were the young guys at one stage, weren't we? When we came on Drunk, we were able to do free comic hosting before that, Drunk Duck in Keenspace or Keenspot. There was no easy webcomic. Like Pitt said, you had to know web design and all this kind of stuff. Really, really advanced stuff. There was no WordPress. That's another new generation thing. WordPress didn't exist. You had to do your own damn web pages, And
I remember there was like Elfwood or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It wasn't the comic posting site, but it was like you guys remember that?
Yeah,
yes.
I can think of that was like
Pinky TA first came up on Elfwood in 2000.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
The first appearance of Pinky TA ever.
And also that's where I learned how to draw because, and actually that's how I got into fantasy because Elfwood was the only, like DeviantArt I discovered much later because I didn't notice it. So I found Elfwood and they had this strict only fantasy, only science fiction policy. So everything I drew had to have elf ears so that it could go up there. And
oh God, yes.
and
Lawyering your artwork.
Yes, and I could get criticism for it because I was teaching myself and I didn't have any other manner of getting some kind of feedback for my stuff. So that's how I learned. And little by little, I got into fantasy and I was thinking like, okay, maybe if I did this and maybe if I did that. That's how I wrote my trilogy because I developed my strong opinions and I wanted to give them flesh and life and blood. Mm-hmm. And there it is.
That's awesome. Yeah, back in the day, I had fantasy art and sci-fi art on Elfwood for ages. Pinky TA first debuted there in 2000, and you had to lawyer your artwork so to fit in the standards, so they wouldn't get you with their police. The Elfwood police would get it off there. So yeah, you had, if you didn't have the skills to do a website, you put it on an online gallery, and DeviantArt didn't exist back then. Elfwood was the first major gallery that I was aware of.
It'd be interesting to go to the Wayback Machine and put in Elfwood. Is Elfwood still up?
I'm not sure. They had a lot of trouble.
I don't think it is. I tried to look for some really old art. So I tried to look for it and didn't seem to be running when I did a couple of months ago.
It was run by... Sorry, Pete, what was that?
I was just saying it would be cool to put it in the Wayback Machine and see.
Yeah.
If anything comes up.
Well, it was run by this Swedish guy who set it up all by himself. He was studying computer science, and he was at the university there. Whatever universities, I imagine they have many of universities in Sweden. But so he set that up all by himself on his own computers, running his own servers and everything. And that's why it sort of run into trouble and things, because it got really big. And then, as happens, you have pretenders that go and copy your entire format and steal all your your people, which happened. DeviantArt did, and other websites. But DeviantArt was the big one, and that's what happened. And Elfwood didn't keep up with the times, and he obviously couldn't afford to keep on running it all by himself. So that's what happens with websites, even Drunk Duck. The newer generation of websites, as well as people, supersede. So that's what happens. We shouldn't really keep on going too long, or this Quackcast is just going to be forever. The way Baines was talking about infinite
some D&D to play.
Infinite Quack canvas.
Exactly. So, do you guys think anything else that you'd like to sort of touch on?
Well, I liked what and I agree with what you guys were saying about how everything is kind of, commodified is not the word, but everything is kind of organized now compared to how it was a few years ago. Like, there are people who will sort of see these trends and see webcomics and try to and put them into these boxes and kind of organize everything and wanting to be the place where it's all done. And then you end up with these limitations. I do think, though, that we will we've always seen and still see, and we will continue to see. Someone will innovate, and then everyone will copy that new thing and go after that. It's maybe on the fringes, but it's out there, and that it's someone who does something different who will ignite the next spark. It's a kind of a never-ending thing.
Absolutely. And with every incarnation will come problems. This next generation will have its own problems that we probably can't foresee. And then that will spark innovation, to deal with those problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. There's different influences that create different trends and come up with things that we can't imagine. Or even retro stuff.
Of course, will change. The technology will keep going forward.
Yeah, or they'll do retro stuff and they'll go back.
Or they'll go back. Yeah, exactly. It'll be time for the throwback. Yeah. Who knows?
Which we're seeing in pop culture now. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Fascinating.
For being part of the Generation Cast.
That's not my...
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.